Okay.
Super. Okay. Good afternoon. Good day to all our attendees. We are expecting a crew of over 350 registrants. So thanks so much for coming to join us. I'm Av Singh, and I am the moderator for today's repeat performance. Both of our guests spoke a couple months ago, giving some insight on growing practices. And we, because of such a positive response to that, we've invited them back. And this time we're talking a little bit more around micro-cultivation. So hopefully from the Canadian experience, we're recognizing that it is these small-scale growers, the micro-producers that are essentially producing the highest quality of flower, the ones that the artisanal flower that the connoisseurs are wanting. We hope that other countries will kind of have a similar suit where they are promoting small-scale cultivation. And with that, we've got our own, I guess he's referred to as the weed Yoda, Ryan Wonkel from Heliospectra is coming back to speak, and Mike Bogoleski from Hanna Instruments is going to give some wisdom around the fertigation. And if you remember last time, Mike focused so much on water quality and the importance of having good water in terms of growing good cannabis. So I just also wanted to mention that, you know, it's been such a long time that we've actually got to see folks in person. You will get a chance to see Mike and Mike's special guest, as well as Ryan at Cultivate. So for folks who are heading down to Columbus, Ohio, July 9th to the 13th, yeah, definitely drop by the Hanna Instruments booth, the Heliospectra booth, and get some more gems of wisdom dropped by these three panelists. I will turn it over to Ryan to sort of introduce himself, as well as perhaps, you know, give some insight on how you feel Heliospectra can really position themselves to support microcultivation.
Awesome, thanks, Av, and I love the weed Yoda. That's the pot Yoda. It's pretty good. That's pretty good. So, hello, hola, aloha, bonjour, everybody. My name is Ryan Wonkel. If you've listened to any of these webinars, you're probably a little bit tired of my intro, so I can keep it a little bit short and sweet. Second generation cannabis grower. I ran multiple cannabis facilities here in the Denver and Boulder region from 2009 to 2015. Multiple High Times Cannabis Cup winner. I come from a multi-generation family of horticulturalists, so background not only of just cannabis, but also a lot of food production and field production, greenhouse experience of vertical farming. I currently work with Heliospectra as our cannabis grower liaison. Heliospectra, if you don't know anything about us, is a Swedish LED lighting company that was founded in 2006, which kind of touches a little bit on Ab of what what do we bring to the table in a sense. Heliospectra came to the table with one common goal in mind, and it was to understand how different light quality and quantity affects different crops at different stages. And I think that that's one of the most important aspects of what we do when we work with our growers and cultivators, whether it's micro producers or some of the larger facilities, of getting them to understand just how much light does affect their crop at different stages, the different techniques that you can do with light to manipulate different production aspects and different morphologies within the crop. So for a lot of us, not only do we provide, that light expertise, we do have a team of plant scientists and plant experts like myself that really work closely with our growers, not only when it comes to light, but maybe some different end of production techniques, which we'll probably touch a little bit on today. But at Heliospectra, we've always focused on the crop. We've always focused on, we always talk about application efficiency. and that is a systematic approach when it comes to lighting. Lighting is one very valuable aspect to this whole synergistic aspect of growing, and I think what makes micro cultivation so appealing and so effective in the market.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Ryan. And that was a nice kind of lead into Hanna Instruments as well, in the sense that um, it's not just the product. You know, you make good quality products, no question, but it's that technical advice and support that that you get to provide, and turning that right over to Mike and his special guest. I think that's definitely something that Hanna Instruments provides as well.
Yes, and hello. I want to thank each and every one of you for attending. I want to thank the Heliospectra team. This is a great team, and this is always a special event. This is the second one, and it's a joy to do this. A little background, Hanna Instruments for one. Well, I'll let you in on a little bit of what I do. I've been with Hanna for a long time, since 1993. Hanna's been here since 1978. It's a worldwide company, very well known in hydroponics and agriculture, as you all know. And I wore many hats here at Hanna. And one of the tasks, one of the jobs I was tasked with was to develop a fertigation system for our farmers. And this was well over 20 years ago. So I was thrown into this wonderful world and used my education at the time and started to put together fertigation systems. I traveled the world and from Holland to Spain, and realized how far behind America was at the time with the technology that was out. And I learned everything I could and came back to the US, and I said, well, how can I move water and nutrients in a way that incorporates this great technology from overseas and still speaks to the American farmer, right? The simplicity, the ease of use, right? How can I couple these things? So we developed kind of a hybrid system at the time that brought that technology over. And as time progressed, this machine that we designed here at Hanna was the original HI 10,000, ended up being a great fit for the cannabis industry as the cannabis industry evolved into legalization, right? So it's been an incredible journey, and we've learned a lot in that journey, and we've developed many techniques to help the grower, not only out in the field, not only in the greenhouses where we have tremendous experience, but also in these grows, and now at the micro level as well. So there's a lot we can share, a lot of knowledge we do that today. My expertise help you with, and I hope today, my work, irrigating the plants, getting the nutrients to the plants. And I'd like to this Elliot girlfriend, and he just joined Hanna, and I threw him into the water. I grabbed him. I said, you know, we were talking today, and I said, man, you've got to jump in on this. Why not, right? So Elliot has a tremendous background in cultivation. He's been growing for what, since 1850, somewhere around. No, just Elliot will give you a little background, but he's our business development manager here. He just joined the team. I wanted to bring him on because I think he can add a lot to our discussion, which is going to it's going to enrich things for everybody watching. So that's it for me. I won't go into the history of Hanna necessarily, but we've been here for a long time. You're all familiar with us. And Elliot, do you want to add to introduce yourself?
Sure.
Please.
Name's Elliot. This is my third week at Hanna, so a little bit less time being here than Mike. Business development manager. Been involved in the cannabis industry most of my life, and been growing cannabis since I was about 16. Not quite 1850, but you know, close enough. A lot of focus on growing the highest quality crop, yeah, I have a background in science, so I'm definitely interested in the nuts and bolts of how to do that. And I'm just here to help everyone else do the same thing as much as I can.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Elliot. And I think what's we've seen in this intro is that there is a wealth of knowledge here. So just a reminder to all our audience members, there is a chat feature or questions feature. Feel free to pose any question. We have no specific agenda here. Mike really doesn't like any planning, so he just likes to speak off the cuff. So I can just, any question that comes up, I can fire it off to Mike and Elliot, Ryan as well. So, that being said, I do have some questions. The first question that I have is the question that I often get posed in designing facilities, and that's, how many flower rooms do I start with? Ryan, do you have any thoughts around that?
Definitely. I mean, there's a lot of thoughts around that. I think when the aspect of micro cultivation, people are always just assuming, okay, it is smaller scale production, which of course, generally speaking, yes, it is going to be smaller scale than typically your larger facilities that you see out there, depending on a couple different things. Main thing that what I talk to people and get them to look at is what kind of regulations that they're bound by. Are they measured by a canopy per square feet? We see that fairly common within the industry. Typically, I think we're talking anywhere from 2,500 to less than 5,000 square feet of canopy space. Sometimes it could be narrowed down to flowering. Sometimes it could be more of what we find in the U.S. in particular areas is more of a caregiver model, which I kind of talk about the caregiver model being very similar in aspects to maybe the micro cultivation licenses that you start to see in Canada, especially have been very popular due to this high quality of product that you see. So with some of those aspects keeping in mind, there's all other different reasons of going with different sizes of rooms. For an easy answer, we typically say that multiple flowering rooms is going to be better. We see anywhere from, on average, we see about 4. We see as many sometimes as 6, and we see some aspects of 2. But I think of reasons of why you are starting to, choose these room spaces. Obviously, cross-contamination plays a large part into your room. That cross-contamination, depending on your cycle time, how you have to be able to mitigate that. Also with regulations, some places being a little bit more strict when it comes to cross-contaminations or any sort of pathogen outbreak like mold. So the more that you can start to maybe mitigate some of those cross-contamination aspects can be a better choice in your business in the long run. So another advantage with why we see most micro facilities and success of these of being this small room. I think that most people think it's, of course, this hands-on aspect, which we will relate and talk about, is in the importance of having a quality to your crop and that. But there's also these mitigation aspects that you talk about. Workflow can also determine how many rooms that you have. Sometimes that can be depending on your cycle time. And we'll touch on some cultivars and different sort of chemovars and genetics that could play a role in how many rooms that you have, whether it's an 8-week strain versus a 12-week strain. So genetic harvest time is definitely very important. Cloning, obviously your mother backstock is very important. How many, genetics you're going to have, how large is your mother room going to play? How's that going to start to be implemented into how many rooms? I think that begins to, again, play into how many different type of rooms that you want. It comes back to really that starts to be cycle time. And then production treatments. Most of the time we'll see that you'll grow only a handful of strains. You're not growing 20 plus different strains in one of your rooms just because of the different production treatments. You are looking to grow really high quality product. Thus, you are going to be doing, different fertigation, different sort of water treatments towards the end. How you can start to be able to control that definitely has an influence of how many rooms that you obviously start to decide. And then I think from when it comes to beyond, cultivation aspects, I mean, of course, you're drying. What's your process at the end? I think most micro cultivation facilities focus on smokable flower. that seems to be the demand out there within the industry. We do start to see trends towards some, I would say, more micro processing of, these very artisanal, kind of sustainable extraction processes that, like rosin, that we find that's starting to trend in the industry. And obviously the quality of that product going in is going to be the quality that you're getting going out. So that will definitely have an influence in some of your layout and design.
Great. And just before I jump to Mike and Elliot, a quick question. In the US, do you have a particular, if you're talking about dry flower, is there a particular batch size that you say, most dispensaries won't take a batch that's less than, 10 pounds or something? Do you see that?
I think it just depends on contractual and different contractual agreements that you might have agreed with some of your partners. Depending on how sought out after some of your products, I would say that those numbers can become a lot smaller. Obviously, it's hard to, market or have a demand for, a half pound, even a pound of product that's hitting the shelf. And it's really hard and not really sustainable for, I would say, another business to be able to carry your product into that aspect. So I would say it's definitely contractual, depending also on the demand that your product might create. You do see quite a bit of fluctuations from, one micro producer's product to another micro producer's product when it comes to what price is available on the market in a wholesale.
And for the most part, you feel very comfortable having multiple strains in the same room?
I would say in general, that can be a depending factor in what you're really trying to achieve in your product. I think that there are some generalizations that you can have with strains that have some very similar aspects, similar timing. I think that if you were, for myself, I'm looking at strains that do have similar finishing times, similar nutrient regimens, just due to some of the complications, but those are of, individual feeding. I think that a lot of times people think that micro cultivation is, again, back to the roots of growing in the basement, and then, it used to be times it by 100 for these big facilities, and it didn't work. Well, taking that basement aspect, even though you can grow good quality, and timesing it by, 10 or 5 still doesn't really work. And I think that's one of the really points I wanted to, drive home, is that micro cultivation, although you do want to spend more hands-on time with the plant, there's a lot of technology and automation that can give you a better control, which allows you to have more hands-on when it comes to work with the plant. And I think that that's where, it really comes with the, Hanna, and working with any sort of fertigation systems that allows the growers to have that control and understanding that that's reliable, and then having more hands-on actual work with the plant.
Wow, it's almost like we got this rehearsed, because now that's a perfect lead in to Mike and Elliot. When we are talking about design, specifically, I'd love to hear about fertigation irrigation rooms as well. So, but I'll just turn it over to you both.
Sure. Now, again, my expertise is moving water. So again, the number of rooms, I agree with Ryan wholeheartedly. I like even numbers, typically 4, 6, because of the cycle, right? The 8 or 12-week cycle. So it actually fits perfectly. Cross-contamination is definitely a consideration as well. Now with moving water, yes, technology is an advantage, and you want to be able to set up your zones and your subzones accordingly, and you want a system that's smart enough to be able to distribute the proper feeds to these locations and to do it accurately, right, without any effect on other strains. So if you have multiple strains in place, you want to make sure you have a distribution system that not only has some degree of feedback back to the main control, but also is set up so that a system can be programmed to make sure the right feed gets to the right zone, and that there is no chance of the wrong recipe being used at the wrong time or on the wrong strain. So it's very important that you have this controlled adequately, and the infrastructure has to be set up with the right pressure requirements, and all of these basic fundamental things have to be in place to ensure that the feed is delivered properly. So that's a major consideration. Now, as far as cross-contamination, Elliot, what do you think regarding cross-contamination and some of the topics, some of the points that Ryan had brought up?
You know, it's kind of hard for me to add too much. Ryan covered it all pretty much. I guess I could say, you know, overall square footage is also going to determine how many rooms.
Good point, yeah.
Because there's a minimum size. You know, obviously, if you're doing a micro cultivation and you have really small square footage, you don't want to have very tiny closet-like rooms. You want to think about heat dissipation and so on and so forth. The type of lighting. So when you're using LEDs, you can get away with a more confined space. When you're using HIDs, HPS for flowering, you got to think about heat dissipation a bit more, and other equipment in the room. You know, we're talking about HVAC plus dehumidification, and you know, there's different concerns with that. Big on the regulations, just to kind of add to that. In certain situations, you know, a lot of folks choose not to do vegetative and propagation and cloning as well. So if you're doing micro cultivation and you really have a limited size, you might just buy cuts, let the propagators do all that, and just flower them. It's not my favorite way of doing things. I like the closed loop system because then you don't have to worry about, as you were just talking about, contamination. A lot of people will buy cuts, and you know, you get some cuts and they look fine, and all of a sudden you got powdery mildew, and nobody wants to deal with that. I don't ever recommend that, but a lot of people do it. You know, the advantage is that 100% of your square footage is devoted to flowering, and you don't have to worry about the propagation. You don't have to worry about all that. I think you're really limited though, because you're limited to what clones are available, and like I said, the biggest thing is contamination. And then other than that, it's really about workflow. And I guess we'll talk about this later, but the workflow really determines how you set up the grow room. So, you know, I've always been dealing with 8-week flowering strains, right. And we typically will have 4 flowering rooms, and everything is offset by 2 weeks. So you harvest every 2 weeks, and then that gives you 2 weeks at every station. So you're going to have a mother room, and you're going to have maybe a combined mother cloning room with your cuts in it, and then you're going to have 2 weeks in pre-veg, 2 weeks in veg, and then you're going to go ahead and move that into one of the flowering rooms. And every 2 weeks, you just rotate it, and it works out perfectly. So, I mean, other than that, Ryan, you did a great job. Can't add much more than what you said.
Well, I think another thing that we should point out is that when we talk micro grows, it is somewhat ambiguous, right? As far as when we talk about square footage as well. I've dealt with so many growers that had considered 5,000 micro grow, even up to 10,000 square feet. So it can be, or a small container unit. So it can be somewhat ambiguous as far as the actual size of and what denotes or what.
So yeah, in Canada, it's less ambiguous. We are restricted to 2,152 square feet of plant surface, which is 200 meters squared. So yeah, less ambiguous in Canada, but it's interesting how people choose to divide it. So, you know, going back to Elliot's comment, some people will just have a more open system where they're buying clones from other producers and just have flowering spaces, while others will be more closed loop with propagation. Elliot did kind of speak to something about, you know, HVAC issues and some of the things that we have to look at when it comes to HVAC. I mean, some of the beauty of a micro is the fact that you can control the environment better, but we're talking about a lot of equipment, and maybe the three of you can kind of speak to some of the challenges around HVAC.
I think, you know, I think with most some micro cultivations, you see that it's, you know, the investment is typically in more personal aspect, and although that it is smaller scale, there's still a lot of equipment and that needs to be purchased. And I still think that when you're looking at it from a synergistic approach, that all this equipment is working in conjunction together. The more efficient of one piece of equipment is going to make the other piece of equipment work and operate better and more efficiently, in a sense. And I think that that's why we get so much interest as an LED producer for lighting for micro cultivators. Of course, that increase of quality that people really gravitate towards. You know, the first thing that people talk about is the increase of quality with LED production. So I think that that's the first aspect that micro producers and micro cultivators start to gravitate towards, or probably already have LED experience from what I see, just because they're already working ahead of the curve. I think most reasons why micro cultivations are successful is the growers and the people behind it. You have all of these passionate individuals. They have a little more control from the individuals that they maybe are working with, and they are usually have more involved in that initial investment. So I think really quickly they also understand that that running LEDs is very quickly tied to how much HVAC that you're going to need into that facility, you know, which is also another cost involved into that. That HVAC is also going to be tied into your dehumidification, and then all of these equipment, including your fertigation systems, your environmental control aspects. All these systems is then connected to your power of your building, and then that comes into another key part. How much is the infrastructure? Are you going with more of a retrofitting of an existing building, which we see very commonly in these small producers, especially in failing economies and things that we have going on, that these facilities are now being retrofitted for growth. So are you restricted into how many amps of electricity that you're running? So all of these decisions come into play. So I think that for most cultivators, I think that that's initial draw. Also for LED is then once you see this synergistic approach, you understand how much all these are just closely related.
Super.
And I would add as well, how are we recapturing? Let's look at sustainability with respect to these systems too, right? How are we recapturing all this water, this condensate? How are we reusing it? How are we monitoring and maintaining, or limiting, not monitoring and maintaining, but ultimately limiting our waste? All of these are very important factors that come in to the technology that have to be considered, not only with power, with heat dissipation and all of these things, but how are we limiting our effect on the environment, and how are we saving costs in our water, in our fertilizer? How are we recapturing all of these resources effectively? So that's something else that needs to be considered when looking at this equipment. Okay, that is a very, very important factor in all of this. So sustainability is a big concern, and recapturing all of this water, all of these resources that we're expending. So again, technology comes into play and is very important. And you need a centralized system that considers this. So how do we best do this? Well, we integrate these systems, right? As Ryan was pointing out. And if we integrate these systems, not only are they communicating to one another, but they're also communicating to the root zone, right? Communicating with the root zone. So all of this is feeding back. How much water do we really need to expend at the root zone? Is it based on time, or is it based on technology? Are we looking at the moisture? Are we looking at the EC? Are we looking at the salt buildup? Are we looking at all of these things and considering how much oxygen are we applying? All of these things come into play and do affect ultimately the type of equipment that we use, from HVAC to everything else. So I think all of that's very important, and we'll get more into that when we talk a little bit more about CEA. So with that.
Again, Weed Yoda has it, but I would say, yeah, just to add some specifics, just to go into it. I mean, when you're using LEDs, I mean, you can get away with about potentially half as much air conditioning load as a regular, high HID lighting, HBS lighting. But one important thing to think about, as Ryan did mention, is that it does change the DHU, and you actually need a little bit more DHU when you do LEDs, because your ACs aren't running as much. And so ACs have a huge DHU component to them. So if they're not running as much, or you have less AC, then you do have to up the DHU a little bit. It's not a lot, but it's something to think about if you're used to growing under HIDs. Other than that, I mean, just to mention it, as long as we're talking about water, You know, when you're talking about small scale microgrows, there may be some tendency to use other types of hydroponic techniques like ebb and flow or something like that. And I think, you know, for those who are familiar with it, they understand, but, you know, it's kind of counterintuitive, but a drip drain to waste system actually conserves a lot more water than an ebb and flow system.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, typically in a drain to waste, you're watering with 15% overage. So whatever you're irrigating with, you're wasting essentially, assuming you're not recapturing it, you're wasting about 15% of the nutrient solution. When you're doing ebb and flow, people think, oh, but you're not wasting anything. Well, what about the end of the week? You know, and then you're topping off all week, and then you're wasting an entire reservoir full of nutrient solution and water. And so it's actually 100% of the volume of a reservoir that you waste with an ebb and flow, whereas you only waste about 15% in drip drain to waste.
Right. Plus you got to think about the square footage, tanks, and variety of other equipment that's associated with various growth.
Yeah. Sorry, Mike, we just missed the last bit of that.
Oh no, I was saying that drain to waste or using drip emitters, drip irrigation. The other advantage is obviously square footage, right? So if you're dealing with large holding tanks and mixing tanks, most likely more directly mixing tanks, then that's more space, right? And space is a major consideration. Real estate is a major consideration in micro. So we want a technique, and I know we're getting kind of off the HVAC topic a little bit, but we want a technique whereby maybe we're direct injecting, right? Maybe we're conserving our irrigation room space, our square footage, and keeping everything as limited as possible.
Sure. I guess you know, yeah, maybe we went off a little bit of HVAC, but that I think it's good. I also was thinking maybe you could even speak to any design flaws that you've seen in other facilities where you feel like I just wish they had done this. And you know, Ryan knows this, and maybe Mike knows this now. I'm a little biased around living soils or systems that use it, whether it's individual containers or we're getting into living soil beds, gaining a lot of popularity here in Canada. But there are some facilities that just aren't well designed for living soil systems. And I'm just thinking, are there other design flaws that you've seen that you just feel like, I wish they had done this?
Well, Elliot is laughing hysterically, so he must have stories like we can't even begin to imagine. So, but I'll go first. I would say your water source. We talked about this in our last webinar, and it's your water source, right? It's how you're getting your water to your plants. You know, it's kind of you know, it's very similar to the human body, right? And your heart and your blood pressure and the stability of your system, right? The same thing is true with a grow facility, right? If your water source is contaminated, if your delivery system is below a certain pressure, or the pressure is erratic and can't be controlled, obviously you're going to have a lot of problems. And most people don't start thinking there, right? They're like, okay, yeah, we got water in pipes. Let's put an injector in and manifolds, and we'll buy some emitters. We're good to go, right? No, you know, how stable is that? What does your incoming water source look like? Do you have backflow preventers and pressure regulators and inside the building that's kind of cutting off what you really need and limiting your maximum flow, right? So these things have to be considered. The existing infrastructure, most folks, what I find in these grow facilities, they don't even look at that. They don't look. They're fixing everything around it. But did you look at how your water is getting into your building? It's still the same as it was before when they had, you know, when they were, I don't know, had a law firm here, whatever it was. But aren't you going to fix that? Because that's not adequate. That's not adequate. So you're going to have. So nobody's really looking at what is my system, my water system look like at the source, right? Am I getting adequate pressure and flow? And you got to know exactly. First of all, you got to do the math. And most folks do this. They know, okay, we're going to use 5,000, 6,000 gallons a day, or in a micro grow much less. And we're going to be at this our min and max flow rates. And we kind of backtrack that. And I always look back and say, okay, will the building support this? Infrastructure support this? So that's usually the biggest mistake people make. far back enough and say, we don't have it under the hood. We have to fix things at the foundational level. And after that, the consideration is, okay, do we have the right size pumps? Do we have, and it's all seems easy, but it's really not. So I would say, to keep it short, and I'll let Elliot go because he seems like he has chomping at the bit to get in on this one. But I would say, for my point, and there's a lot of issues we can go through, but from my point, it starts there at the water source.
Yeah, well, we can start there, absolutely. So yeah, there's a million ways to do things wrong. There really is, and unfortunately, I've seen a lot of that. I've done some of it myself. I mean, that's how we learn, right? Hopefully not the same mistake twice is what I try to avoid. But yeah, just to start off with the water, where you left off, a lot of people don't understand how important it is to have pure water when you're putting it into a system. And, one of the things that's really important for plants is beneficial microorganisms. And if you're on municipal water and there's chlorine in it and there's chloramine in it, and you're not getting that out of there, you're going to be wreaking havoc on your beneficial microorganisms. And the way I look at it, it's kind of like probiotics for your plant. Our health is dependent upon our microorganisms that are in our gut. And if they're not there, we're in a world of hurt. And most plants are going to be the same way, really. And I know there are some people that run sterile systems, and I've seen it done pretty successfully. It's really not my bag. I'm big on the ecosystem, the root ecosystem, root zone ecosystem. And it's critical that you get rid of the sterilizing agents. And if you're doing chlorine, if the municipalities are doing chlorine, a lot of times nowadays they add ammonia as well. And so it used to be old school. You could just, get lots of water and let it sit overnight. Chlorine evaporates off. The chloramine, once you add the ammonia, and when it's in water with the chlorine, it recombines to form chloramine. That is not volatile. It will not evaporate off. It will stay in there. And in fact, you can't even get out with charcoal. You got to use the activated charcoal, the KDF filters to get that out. And then on top of that, so the first thing you would do is a sediment filter to spare your other downstream filters, activated charcoal, and then you do an RO membrane. And some people will go, well, why do I need RO membrane? I don't need to do all that. Well, the truth of the matter is there's a lot of things in your water, and it can fluctuate seasonally. It can go up and down. It depends on whether you're well or whether you're municipal water. But the way I like to look at it is, if you've got, let's say you got 250, ppm, which around here, we got ECC, but I'm still stuck on ppm, sorry. But anyway, let's say you have 250 ppm of random ions in your water. Well, if you keep it in there, not only do you not necessarily know what that is, and it can fluctuate seasonally, but that's 250 ppm of nutrients that you can't put in there because you can only go up to a certain maximum amount before you start doing damage to the plants. So by getting that down to essentially zero, closer to like 20 or 30 with an RO membrane, then you can completely define what is in your water. So I can't stress the filtration and the RO system enough. Really needs to be done.
Yeah. And temperature is another consideration, and not only are monochloramines and oxidizers in general affecting microorganisms, but also affecting your infrastructure. Your RO membranes will deteriorate in 3 months to 6 months exposed to an oxidizer. So that's another consideration.
Very good point. And as long as we're talking about temperature, another key thing to do with the water, and then I'll move on to a few other topics, but is dissolved oxygen. And as you go lower in temperature, you can get more dissolved gas, and in this case, oxygen, in that water. If you go too low, you're going to be shocking the root zone. So we found that between 66 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit is a really good sweet spot. You get a lot of dissolved oxygen. The dissolved oxygen will allow the growth of beneficial microorganisms. If you have low dissolved oxygen, then you're going to be growing the bad stuff. So you have it run through a chiller, and your RO tanks can go through a chiller. The water will dump back into the tank, and you kind of let it waterfall back into the tank so it gets oxygenated and cooled at the same time, 68 degrees. It's a simple system. A lot of people, I can't tell you how many people just go, I don't know if I really need that. I'm like, come on, you know how much work and effort you're putting into this? And it's a common thing. They don't want to spend a few $100 on a chiller, or maybe it's a few more bucks than $100, but they don't want to spend the money on a chiller and an extra pump, but they're spending years of their lives growing these plants. It just doesn't make sense. You really want to get that equipment up front. A few other just real quick things. when it comes to lights, and this is another thing that I've seen a lot. If you're in a confined space, it's totally different than being in a warehouse where you've got 14, 16 feet of space to hang your lights up there. And I've gone into some grow rooms where, you know, they're like, yeah, I read somewhere that the more light you put on the plants, the more product that you get up. And it's like, oh, well, that's true. But if you have a Gavita, double-ended Gavita light, and you're pumping out 1100, 1150 watts, and you've got that, 18 inches above your plants, like, that's not true. You're gonna kill those plants. Like, if you're in a confined spot, accept the limitations of what you have to deal with your light source. I've seen some of the finest quality herb grown off of 600 watts, to be honest. Like, you can grow a higher quality off 600 than 1000. And I'm not saying that that's the best solution in every case. And certainly if you're focusing on higher production, then yeah, you can get a higher wattage light and raise it up a little bit. But I'm a big fan of LEDs. I mean, that's the way to go. And if you're doing LEDs, depending on the LED, you tend to drop those a bit lower on your plants. They can handle it. It's just a lot nicer for the plant. It's just beautiful. It really is. So I'm a big fan of that. But know your limitations. Don't go growing, in a closet with 1100 watts. The other thing is just in general, whatever you calculate out that you're going to need on your power requirements, go 20, because you will regret it. You will regret it if you don't. Hopefully we're not hung up here. I see you can.
Nope, you're good.
Okay, great. And then the other thing is to also look at it the same way when you're dealing with HVAC, when you're dealing with air conditioning. Go over on the HVAC. You get a hot day, the temperatures are getting warmer every year. The last thing you want to do is have to go and redo the HVAC system because you calculated for 2021, and in 2 years it's a little bit hotter, or we have a hot spell. And then a little shameless plug for Hannah, I guess, is have some backup meters for goodness sake, folks. These things are not that expensive. And I used to work in hydroponic retail as well. And when somebody comes in and goes, oh, my meter's broke, but I need another one right away because I got to change my nutrient solution today. It's like, and you don't have a backup meter. I mean, these things are not that expensive. For key equipment, spend a little extra, get your backup meters, get a few extra circuits on the circuit board, get a little bit more tonnage than you need. It's going to save you so much headaches, believe me.
And like I had said in the last webinar, don't be afraid to spend the money up front. Get the system that is stable, stability, and get the technology in place that's going to make sure that all of these particular steps along the way are exactly where they need to be. Because any mistake, any shortcoming is just going to value your output, and it's going to.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Any common design flaws that you've witnessed that you want to speak to, or follow up on Mike or Elliot's comments?
Yeah, those were all really great, valid points and comments that people should listen to. If I can, I think even just tying along with it, I said before that micro cultivation doesn't mean non-sophisticated or primitive growing. I like just saying, that of course we are trying to, you feel people are like getting back to the roots, more hands-on with the plant. But I think of finding these tools to work with you instead of against you is very key when it comes to then being able to spend more time on the plant, whether it's super cropping, de-leafing, the things that can't really necessarily be done by any sort of automation or machine. One common thing, and as you touched, Ab, the living soil in no-till is completely been definitely a trending in all the rage when it comes to micro cultivation. There is definitely that I truly believe in a symbiotic relationship between the roots, your plant obviously, and the microorganisms within that soil. So I see that with that trend towards living soils, super soils, however people want to call them nowadays, a lack of automation, that people think that just because they're going with again, a living soil, that they need to get the old school hand watering pot and they can individually go to each of their plant and cater to it, whether it's in a bed or a fabric pot, which are pretty popular. that I see that still automation is going to be your best friend, even with those living soil aspects. Actually, I think it's even more valuable, and I think, as Elliot points out, the amount of control that you can have when it comes to dissolved oxygen rates, as Mike points out, specific watering rates, that it can actually increase that quality of soil that you're growing with, and the biological dynamic that you have. And then I think it then comes down to as well, and whether, not really a shameless plug or not, but for me it's necessarily nails on a chalkboard, is you go into a micro facility and they're using HPS. That is not the light that you want to be utilizing. It's not, it's, people say it's closer to the sun. In fact, it's not closer to the sun. If you look at the spectrums of LED and compare with the McCree curve, and understanding the dynamics of radiant heat and infrared heat, you'll quickly realize that HPS is not really being beneficial for your plant. It does work, it does produce a quality of product. We've seen it all work, but going with LED is going to be more sustainable, and it's going to give you definitely a wider range of a chemical profile within your crop. So I think that's always important. And then it comes always down to post-harvest. You can grow the best plant in the world and you can ruin it just in your curing process, how you're drying, your trimming, or your dry trimming versus wet trimming. I'm not going to sit here and knock wet trimmers or anything like that, but your processes need to match. All your processes need to be able to match along the way for what type of product that you want in the end results. So we could talk about this all day long, but I'll leave it at that.
And you feel free to comment on this, but the Ontario Cannabis Store, they've got a small batch artisanal category. In that category, you have to whole plant hang dry, hand trim, and hand package. So that may speak to that whole concept of wet versus dry and machine versus hand.
And it's good to see that, you know, consumers are getting more concerned about where their products are coming from, just like food production, and understanding maybe a little bit more of those processes and nuances that maybe necessarily they didn't know a year ago, and especially probably 5 years ago when they, you know, went and, you know, got something off of the street.
So I was supposed to get a topic in on genetics. I think I'm going to skip that because we've had a lot of discussion around this whole idea that as you move out of the legacy market, that you still need to adopt technologies. I was wondering if Mike and Elliot or Ryan, you've got some feedback around that hesitancy of legacy growers to adopt certain technologies, and how we can. I mean, I think many legacy growers would use their EC pen. I think that's what I used to think of Hanna as, is they supplied an EC pen. How are you overcoming some of those challenges and getting these micro growers to use light sensors, use other sensors around dissolved oxygen, or adopting these other technologies in a controlled environment agriculture? Oh, you might be muted.
Well, part of your question. Are we good? Okay. I heard part of your question. We broke up a little bit, so I do apologize. But I think what you were asking is, how do we get the growers in these types of small facilities to embrace the technology and CEA in general? I think the data is there. I think it's obvious, right? If you understand pH, if you understand alkalinity, you understand they're using EC, you understand moisture, they're going to be forced through regulation to limit the amount of waste they produce. They're going to be forced to use only a certain amount of water. Okay, water quality is key, especially in these small grows. So every drop of water counts. Why wouldn't you use technology? Dissolved oxygen, the information is becoming so prevalent. It's becoming almost obvious what occurs. I mean, when you're talking about, not only do the roots thrive in an oxygenated environment, but you're dealing with salts, right? So if you're dealing with salts, the large ionic radius of salts is such that it moves oxygen out, right, naturally. So I think people are coming, I think growers are really starting to embrace this. And when you have, when you have younger growers like Ryan who are on top of their game, I think that's kind of like propagating. That in and of itself is a grow, right? Because people are looking up to Ryan and say, hey, there's Weed Yoda. We got to listen to what he's saying. And I think that is disseminating. That is becoming to be the way of the future. And to hold on to the old way of thinking is just not, it's not working. And the product itself will speak to this. So when you say dissolved oxygen, and that's becoming a bigger and bigger topic every day, the data's there. The data's there. You're dealing with salts. Salts kill oxygen, period. And the roots thrive on oxygen. Pretty much common sense, right? And how do we deliver that oxygen? How do we do it efficiently? It's very affordable to do. And Elliot made some points, but also the types of tanks you utilize. You can utilize hydrostatic pressure, right? Which is free, right? You already buy the tanks, right? Utilize hydrostatic pressure, move that oxygen into a dissolved form. It doesn't cost anything to do that. You can make a simple aeration system with PVC and a drill for pennies, right? So why would you want to, right? With a Venturi and a circulator loop. So this type of technology can be utilized very inexpensively. So with the information age, I tend to disagree in a way that the people are pushing back against it. I think the information is there. I think they're embracing it. I think a lot of people are really embracing it. And when you have, I mean, a lot of the systems we've designed are producing buds bigger than my, twice the size of my head in a 1 gallon pot. I mean, it's just amazing what is being produced with technology today. So and then you have all this information that's disseminated via social media, all these images, right? How can you not say, whoa, look at that. Listen to Ryan, right? Whoa, we got to listen, right? So I tend to believe that it's not really so much of a fight as it was. I think it's really coming online.
Great. We've got a lot of questions coming in, and I do want to start getting to them. Ryan, did you have any comments, or can I just start asking some questions? And I will ask our panelists to be short with their answers, reminding our participants that you can meet each of these individuals at Cultivate in a couple of weeks, if not at the Grow Up Conference, hopefully, perhaps even at MJ Biz as well. So looking forward to actually meeting with these folks in person at some upcoming conferences. The first question I see is suggestions for effective water treatment against pathogens often presented in irrigation systems, currently using ECA with poor efficacy. So any suggestions around water treatment, effective water treatment?
Yeah, I would say UV is a powerful mechanism. Obviously, you have to have proper filtration coming in, RO. UV ozone is used in many of the systems that we design. I prefer staying away from oxidizers, although chlorine is another type of oxidizer that's used, but there is quite the difference between you got to differentiate between ozone and chlorine because there are different types of oxidizers. I don't like using chlorine necessarily because it can be damaging if it's not controlled properly. It's like a beast you really got to keep in a cage, and you got to watch it very, very closely. And the technology is there to allow you to do that. But ultimately, and there are certain pathogens that ultimately are resistant to it. But the benefit of chlorine is that it does carry residual. Ozone is a little bit better because it kills on contact and it doesn't carry that residual. So what does that mean? When you apply it, it's really not making it necessarily to your plants, to your root zone. So it has a lesser life throughout the infrastructure. So that's got pros and cons attached to it. For me, I would stick to UV primarily. and a proper filtration system coupled with RO.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
And we talked about this the other day, and aeration. Aeration is an easy, again, if you're at Cultivate, stop by. I'll be more than happy to talk your ear off about very simple techniques to oxygenate your water, which makes it very inhospitable to a lot of microorganisms that can be dangerous.
Oh, super. Great.
I would say that the best thing to prevent pathogens is to have healthy plants, because you can sterilize everything coming in, and you should do that. And proper entry protocols, so you don't bring, powdery mildew spores in and stuff like that. But if you don't have healthy plants, they're going to catch something. Something's going to grow where you don't want it to grow. If you listen to your plants and you keep them healthy, you're going to be doing fine. They can fight a lot of this stuff off themselves. It's when we stress them out that they're not able to do it. It's just like a human being,
Perfect. I got a lighting question popping up here. It says the RX30 would be an excellent LED light source for microcultivation due to its advanced PPF and spectra for full spectrum cannabinoids and terpenes for trichome farmers. Any comments on that, Ryan? And what would you be recommending?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely, I mean, you're looking at a flexible controlled light. Obviously, he's referring to, we have is the Dyna. There's 9 different wavelengths in that model. We do have a lot of traction, of course, within the academic and research world. But when it comes with more of commercial cannabis production, and when it comes to more applicable to especially commercial cannabis production, we find that the Elixia is definitely a more of a lighting choice for the cannabis producers, just because it does have, blue, white, red, far red as well. There is no UV into that light, so I think that that's what starts to interest some of the research aspects when it comes to the Dyna, but understanding some of, I would say, not so pitfalls, but some of the challenges that comes with a 9 waveband light that you're controlling versus a 4 waveband light. We find that the 4 waveband light works just as well for most of all applications that you're looking for, including, whether it's a UV treatment, we actually will utilize a blue light treatment instead of the UV.
Okay, great. I know I was supposed to talk a little bit around sustainability. Mike has made reference to it in the fact that there will be regulations around wastewater management, water use and stuff. So I do encourage to drop by the booths to address those. Heliospectra has actually put out a few e-booklets around energy incentives and incentive programs. I encourage you to go to the Heliospectra website to download those booklets, both for the US and Canada. So I encourage you to do that. I'm going to jump back to there were some great questions around drying and curing, but this is like a nice hanging curveball for Mike and Elliot here. How can I know the best EC in every stage of the crop?
I think the easiest way to answer that, which is a little bit cheating, but you got to listen to your plants. I mean, every plant, every strain is different. Every grow system is different. And with some time, you'll be able to look at your plants and determine whether or not they're healthy, whether you could push them a little bit harder, whether you need to back off a little bit. It does take some time, but you really, really got to listen to your plants. And a lot of what we do with the measuring tools and sensors that we have is just kind of another way of listening to the plants. Some folks will read EC measurements before they irrigate, and then they'll water the effluent after the wastewater after they irrigate, and they'll see the difference between it. Everybody's got their own magic recipe. I have my recipe. I've been developing it for more years than I care to admit on camera, but many decades. And I mean, one thing I will say, kind of going back to like common errors that people do in this particular question, is that a lot of folks think, they say, oh, you know what, I heard about silica, I got to add silica. Oh, you know what, I heard about cannabis, and they go through these additives, and they start with their 3-part or their 2-part mix, and they just keep adding additive after additive after additive after additive. And then they come into the store, when I used to work in the store, and they say, I don't get it. You know, I bought one of every additive in the store and added it to my nutrient solution, and my plants look horrible. And it's like, did you adjust, you know, your base salts for that? Because a lot of the additives have other nutrients in them. And so me personally, I'm big into details. I'm big into spreadsheets. I actually have an Excel spreadsheet where anytime I want to add a new additive, I calculate out exactly, I mean, down to each individual component, what is going into that. And then I adjust my salts to make up for that. But that being said, I mean, gosh, I mean, actual ppm measurements, it really depends. I mean, you know what? Let me let Weed Yoda answer. I've talked enough on this.
Unfortunately, I have to wrap this up. I think what we got out of this is that we got three phenomenally knowledged folk here, and you really do need to reach out to them. I believe their emails are going to be available on the website or will be mailed out to those who have registered for the conference. I too will try to respond. I think there was a comment there on living soils and aphids. We'll check, we'll make sure we answer all those questions with individual emails back to the folks who submitted them. And I just really want to encourage people to check out both the Hanna Instruments website, the Heliospectra website, lots of information out there. Reach out to Mike, Elliott, and Ryan, and definitely come and join them at Cultivate, and then hopefully again at the Grow Up Conference, if not sooner. Thanks to Heliospectra for inviting me to moderate the panel, and thanks to my guests, Ryan Wonkel from Heliospectra, Mike Bogoleski from Hanna Instruments, and Elliott, the newest family member of the Hanna crew. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Av. I really appreciate it. And again, thanks, Mike and Elliott. Cheers, guys.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all. We appreciate it. Thank you.
It's great. Let's do it again soon.
Cheers.
Bye now.